Up next, a transportation system that changed the face of Montgomery County. And no, we're not talking about the Metro. Don't go anywhere. Hi, welcome to Paths to the Present. I'm your host, Gail Street. Nowadays, there's a lot of talk about growing smarter by clustering development around transit stations. It's a great idea, but not a new one. Back in the late 1800s, Montgomery County's rural countryside was radically transformed by the Metropolitan Branch of the B&O Railroad. It laid the groundwork for suburbs in the down county, for an agricultural boom in the up county, and the expansion of some existing towns all along the line. We'll show you what we mean in a moment, but first, try your hand at this history quiz. What very famous athlete lived here from 1925 to 1935? Looking at it now along busy old Georgetown Road in Bethesda, it's hard to believe that this house was once surrounded by a couple of acres and featured a baseball diamond. Baseball is your main clue. Here's another. A county high school is named in his honor. Think you know who lived here? Stay tuned. I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. The first railroad line to operate in the United States was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, or the B&O for short. Completed in 1853, it connected the port city of Baltimore with the Ohio River in Wheeling, West Virginia. To this day, this route is considered the B&O's main line, but it wasn't long before the branch lines were added to reach more cities. One of those branch lines overtook the main line and dramatically changed the face of Montgomery County. The Metropolitan Branch of the B&O Railroad began operating on May 25, 1873. Traveling from Georgetown to Point of Rocks, West Virginia, it connects to the B&O's main line 65 miles west of Baltimore. Historian Susan Soderberg authored a book on the Met, as it's called, to commemorate its 125th anniversary. She says planning for it began just as the main line was being completed.
That very same year, 1853, a local person, Francis Cassatt Clopper and Mr. Corcoran, and some other entrepreneurs got together and formed the Metropolitan Railroad Company to build a branch line off of this main line that went directly from Point of Rocks to Washington, D.C. Now, that company did surveying. They never got the railroad built because the Civil War happened, and then their charter ran out after 10 years. And so in 1865, the B&O Railroad took over the whole plan. And they hired new engineers. They reconfigured the line a little bit, and it was completed right here in Gaithersburg. They started at either end and met in the middle, so it was completed in February 8, 1873.
Once it became operational, the Metropolitan Branch was used more than the B&O's main line.
When it was completed in 1873, all of the trains went west from Baltimore down through Washington and then back up through the old Metropolitan Branch. And the reason for this is that the old main line of the B&O ran through some tunnels that couldn't be widened and couldn't be enlarged. So when they ran bigger trains, bigger freight cars, they couldn't get them through the tunnels. And also in the early 20th century, the Metropolitan Branch was double-tracked. And the old main line of the B&O is still single-track because of these tunnels.
Laying the 42 miles of track was quite an engineering feat. Tall viaducts had to be constructed to span the various streams and rivers that were in the way. This masonry bridge crossed Rock Creek near Kensington. A wooden trestle was built over the 100-foot gorge at Little Seneca Creek. And the Monocacy River was originally spanned by this iron and stone viaduct. Besides laying the track, stations had to be built.
Well, the railroad line is 42 miles long from Washington, D.C. to Point of Rocks, Maryland. And there were 28 stations, including Washington and Point of Rocks, along that line. 22 of these stations had station houses. The rest of them had waiting shelters. Now, these stations, for the most part, were designed by Francis Baldwin, who designed railroad stations for the B&O Railroad. And Francis Baldwin designed other things besides railroad stations. He did a number of the buildings at Catholic University and other building designs. He was a very famous architect, so we're really very lucky to have these examples of his extraordinary talent.
Today, only 5 of the original structures remain. Some still operate as waiting areas. Others have been given new uses. Point of Rocks in West Virginia is the grandest of them all. It began as a one-story building in 1871, but then 4 years later, Baldwin expanded it to this Victorian Gothic structure. Dickerson features a simple wood frame structure, the design of which is mirrored in other stations. Gaithersburg is a substantial brick building with a freight house next door. Today, a coffee shop operates out of the station, and the city's community museum is in the freight house. Rockville was moved to this spot in 1981 to accommodate metro construction and is now occupied by a law firm. And Kensington resembled the Dickerson station, but alterations changed it over the years. In 1978, the Germantown station was burned to the ground by vandals, but the county was able to reconstruct it using original plans. In addition to the beautiful stations, unique bridges, and miles of track, the Metropolitan Branch forever changed the face of Montgomery County. A trip from Washington to Rockville used to take 8 grueling hours on a muddy, rutted road. On the Met, it took a mere 45 minutes. People and goods could now travel more easily and efficiently. The railroad brought growth and prosperity to the countryside it crossed. A good example is right here in Gaithersburg.
Well, Gaithersburg was here before the train came through. It was called Log Town when it was first built. It was just a little town along Route 355, and it became a big flourishing city after the train came through. There were 2 mills, flour mills, built nearby. All kinds of stores and restaurants grew up.
Looking at Gaithersburg today, it's clear that the city grew up alongside the railroad. To varying degrees, this occurred up and down the line. Rockville's population more than doubled once the train began to operate. New residential subdivisions featured lovely Victorian homes that are still here today. And hotels and boarding houses now drew weekend and summer visitors. Germantown's business district moved 1 mile to the east just to be near the train station. Mills and other industry clustered around it. Closer in, new suburbs were born. People could now live away from the city and commute to work. Kensington and Garrett Park were 2 such examples. They were created to appeal to the well-to-do. Another, Tacoma Park, offered less expensive housing for government workers. Some stops also became destination points.
Forest Glen was built as a resort community. It had a big hotel there, but the hotel didn't flourish, and so it was sold and made into a female academy, a female seminary, which is a school for girls. And it really had a big attraction at that time. A lot of well-to-do families sent their girls to this academy.
The stations north of Rockville served the surrounding farmers and dramatically changed how they did business.
This was a large agricultural area in upper Montgomery County, and it grew mainly wheat and corn. So first of all, the wheat and corn mills that ground this into flour and corn meal became situated next to the railroad tracks, so they could then put their products right on the railroad cars and take them into the city. Many farmers diversified at this point and went into dairy and fruit, because now they had a way to ship perishable items very quickly to market.
Not all the results were positive. Clarksburg, once a thriving town along Route 355, where travelers stopped to rest their horses and get supplies, died because the railroad was just too far away. The popularity of the Met lasted for nearly 50 years. After World War I, automobiles took over and train traffic waned. As a result, railside towns began to decline. But in the 1970s, commuter travel, as well as freight transportation, became popular again. Today, the Met is part of the CSX system, on which the MARC commuter train also operates. As a result, this train line continues to have an influence on how and where this county will grow.
The Metropolitan Branch had a tremendous impact on the county, both economically and culturally from the very beginning, and it still does. It provides a way now for people to get into the city to work without having to get into their cars, and it provides a great way to get freight back and forth from Baltimore west. So it's still acting in the same capacity that it was originally conceived, and who knows, in the future it might even have a different use than we're using it for today.
Okay, time's up. Did you figure out what famous athlete once lived in this house? Pitching great Walter Perry Johnson, also known as the Big Train, moved to this Bethesda house in 1925 and lived here for 10 years. Known for his breakneck fastball, Johnson spent his entire professional career with the Washington Senators, pitching for 21 seasons and coaching for 8. After leaving baseball, he moved his family to a bigger farm in Germantown and was elected to the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners. He died in 1946 at the age of 59. Today, Walter Johnson High School in Bethesda bears his name and features this monument that once hung in Griffith Stadium, the Washington Senators' home. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, send an email to paths.present@verizon.net. Be sure to tune in again next time as Paths to the Present introduces you to some award-winning Montgomery County history students. See you then.